In this video, we're going to create a new Java class, which will be used by the framework to create a JSON payload, which will be sent back as a response to a calling client. Let's say it's a mobile application, and it will contain some additional details confirming that user details have been stored in our database. We will return user public ID, first name, last name, and maybe email address of the user that has been just created in our database. So for organizing our Java classes that are being used to convert incoming JSON into a Java object, we've created a new package under UI model request. Now I'll create a new package for keeping Java classes that are being used to return information back with the response. And I will call that package not a request, but response. And click finish. Now, as we go on with this project, we'll be creating different packages to organize our classes better. Don't be scared if there are too many packages. You can always organize your Java classes into a different package structure. But over the time, with experience on working with different projects, I have learned to organize my classes this way that I'm showing you in this video course. And as your application grows on and you have many classes to be used as request model and you have many classes that are being used as response model, I like to put them into different packages so that I can easily find them when I need. So now when I have a package created, I'll click on it and choose new and then create a new Java class. And this one I will call user rest. Now all the classes that are being used as a response model, I add a postfix to them, rest. It's not a requirement, it's just easier for me to see that this class is being used on the UI level and it's being used to communicate information back to a calling client like mobile application. So I'll click on finish to create this Java class. And now I will need to add class fields that will be returned back as JSON document. So the very first one, I will return a public user ID. Now this user ID is different from the user ID that is stored in a database as auto increment key. We know that when we create a database table, we normally create one of the fields like auto increment that is being used as ID, and that field starts with the value 1, and then when a new record is inserted into database, it is incremented by 1 and becomes 2 and then 3 and 4 and so on. Now this user ID value is different. I do not like to return back a database user ID because this user ID will later be used in the request to find user information in database by ID and return back, for example, in get user details request. And if this user ID is a database user ID, then a malicious user can always guess user ID. They can be always sure that there is a user with ID 5 and there is a user with ID 6 and 7. But if I make this user ID alphanumeric value of 30 or 40 characters long, which is randomly generated, a malicious user will never be able to guess a real user ID of my users in the database. So this user ID is a public user ID and it is secure to returning back with the response to a mobile application. Then I will return first name. So that will be private string first name and then private string last name and private string email. Note that this user rest class contains only those details that we want to be returned back to as a response to create a new user with our mobile application. For example, we want to make sure that user password is not returned. And if we store values like sold, or if we store value like token, we don't want those values to be returned. This is why the request model is very much different from the response model, because the request model, for example, contains password and the response model cannot contain password. And when we are going to be working with the database and we will create an entity class, that entity class will also contain many user details that are going to be stored in the database, and we do not want those details to be returned back with the response. So be careful here and make sure you do not return any sensitive information that can be used to compromise your system. Okay, let's say we're done here, and now we will need to generate getters and setters as well. So I'll bring up the drop-down menu and then go to source and then choose generate getters and setters. Select all of them and click on OK. And here we go. Let me format my source code to make it look nicer. And we are done with the user REST class. Now I'll go back to my user controller and replace this string with user REST. And I will import this class. And because the return type has changed, we can no longer return string. Let's return null so that we do not get a compile time error. Okay, so we're done with the request model and the response model. Let's continue to the next video.